brought to you by the reinvented 2012 Camry. It's ready. Are you? Welcome to Stuff You Should Know from HowStuffWorks.com. Stuff You Should Know is brought to you by Visa. We all have things we like to think about. Online fraud shouldn't be one of them, because with every purchase, Visa prevents, detects, and resolves online fraud. Safe, secure, Visa.
Hey, and welcome to the podcast. Josh and Chuck here, a couple of staff writers at HowStuffWorks.com. How's it going, Chuck?
It's going good, Josh.
So, Chuck, I hate to tell you this, but there are people who are setting themselves on fire all over India right now. Have you heard anything about this?
Right now?
Possibly. Very lately. By right now, I mean lately.
No, I didn't know that.
It's becoming something of a widespread trend, actually, terribly. I read about one guy who's a tea vendor. You know, he just sells tea like, you know, you buy a hot dog
Right.
on the streets of New York. This guy just sells tea. And apparently he fell in the bad graces of a local representative of the local government. And the guy was kind of being abused by this guy, the government official.
Right.
And in retaliation, he doused himself in kerosene and set himself on fire in front of the guy's house.
That'll show him.
Yeah, pretty much. Now, the guy lived, but
Man.
he has burns like over 95% of his body.
Wow.
And at this point, you kind of wonder, all right, well, which is worse, you know?
Right. That sounds like a terrible way to go.
And the whole thing kind of reminded me that of an article I've written. It's called "Is There a Worst Way to Die?"
Right. It's a
And
good one.
When I love this article. It was like it was really interesting to write.
I bet.
I talked to a funeral director. I talked to an ER doctor, and I also spoke with the guy who is the director of the Ernest Becker Foundation. We'll talk about that in a minute. But because there's no quantifiable way to say,
Right.
yes, there's definitely a worse way to die, and here it is. It's all subjective.
Right.
And even worse, there weren't any, you know, nationally recognized polls out there. I actually contacted Gallup to find out if they'd ever asked that question. They
Did
got
you
back to
request
me.
a poll or no?
No, I wanted to find out what the data was, if they'd ever taken that poll,
Right.
and they said that they never had. I found one that was pretty close, a 1991 Gallup poll that was about fear of dying, not the worst way to die. And astoundingly, only 25% of the people polled said that they were afraid to die.
Interesting.
And I think a really logical follow-up question would have been, how often do you actually think about your own death?
Right. Maybe we should have conducted our own poll.
Maybe we will. We'll get it up on the site in no time.
Right.
Instead of quiz corner, fear of death, you know, corner.
Right.
But while I was researching it, I came across some impromptu polls about the worst way to die. Immolation it usually ranks up pretty high.
Yeah, I would say so.
Burning to death, not good.
Not good at all. I would say drowning's probably up there too.
Drowning's up there too. Yeah, they're usually they're usually interchangeable at the top. What's your worst way to die?
Boy, I don't know if I could say a worst method of death, but I think that anything where I died alone would be the worst way.
That is very funny that you bring that up, because I was doing extra research for this podcast, and there was a British poll from April, this past April, and the majority of the respondents said that their worst death was a dying alone.
Yeah, like Isaac Hayes, God rest his soul, he just passed a few days ago.
Sure.
And I think they found him in his home gym with a treadmill going. And something as mundane as that, it just seems like the most depressing way to go, you know?
Yeah.
You're lying there, your treadmill's still alive, right next to you, and there you are.
Right. And surrounded by no one.
Right. Or Elvis Presley, as you know, I got Elvis on the brain.
Oh, yeah.
After writing about Graceland. And, you know, Elvis famously died in his bathroom reading a book. And no one found him, you know, for hours. So he was just laying there in his bathroom.
Yeah. So the second worst aspect of death that people came up with was not enough access to pain relief.
Right.
Which is a big thing too. Like, if you basically there's a really good way to answer this question is by changing the wording. Is there a best way to die?
Right.
I think you would find across the board dying in your sleep would
Right.
probably be the best, most highly rated way to go. People don't want to feel pain.
No.
People don't want to be afraid or alone.
No.
My worst death kind of combines all these, except for the pain part. I don't think pain would be involved. Plane crash.
Right.
I'm flying to Malta a week or so from now, and
Good
I'm,
luck,
I'm
buddy.
yeah, I'm not looking forward to the plane ride. And my big problem with dying in a plane crash is if you're at 30,000 feet or something like that, it doesn't happen instantaneously.
Yeah, I know where you're
It's
headed
probably
here.
a good minute or two headed straight to
Right.
Earth at like 800 miles an hour.
Right.
But even that takes a minute, maybe two, maybe three, depending on how high up you are. And buddy, you're totally aware of what's going on the whole time.
Right.
You got a solid minute to 3 minutes to think about, hey, I'm going to die.
Right. And the panic and the hysteria, just I would say, with everyone on the plane. It's not if you were by yourself, it would be bad enough. But you have hundreds of strangers
Sure.
that you were probably annoyed with just moments earlier for one reason or another, and you're all going through this. So
At least you're not going to die alone.
yeah, well,
But I'll
that's a
tell
good
you
point.
what, if George Gallup asked the people on a plane that was going down if they feared death, I'm pretty sure that the percentages would skyrocket.
Right. They'd have to be a hastily performed poll.
Yeah, exactly. So, basically, check our approach to death, our fear of death, in some theorists' eyes, is a result of a kind of sanitizing of death,
Right.
of basically our desire to not look death in the face, not think about death.
Which
And
brings you
there's-
back to Becker, correct?
Becker and thanatology.
Right.
A lot of Ernest Becker's views, his whole field was called the psychology of death, right?
Right.
And in Becker's opinion, culture, every aspect of culture, from our lazy boy recliners to NASCAR to whiskey to Guitar Hero
Right.
to the climbing the corporate ladder, whatever it is, it all serves to distract us from thinking about our own mortality.
Right.
So culture has been created to distract us, so we can throw ourselves into it. That's Becker's stance.
Right.
The problem is we in Becker's opinion, he died many years ago at age 49, sadly.
I wonder if he saw that one coming.
I don't know, but I'll bet you if there was ever a human who was walking the earth who was cool with it,
Right.
it was Becker, and he died of cancer too. So I mean, he knew it was coming. But in Becker's opinion, we know that death is coming. We're distracting ourselves. So the unconscious mind has to find an outlet somewhere, and usually that outlet is violence or aggression or war.
Right.
So in Becker's opinion, if we'd all just go ahead and accept the fact that we are going to die someday, and we don't know when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen, we'd all be a lot better off. We'd all basically chill.
Right. And I know along the same lines of how we insulate ourselves from death is how there's not as many open casket funerals these days. And I know back in the olden times, as they say,
Well, as recent as the 19th century.
yeah, people would sit up with the dead. I know that's a southern tradition where
Mhm.
you would literally have the body in your house or wherever they died, and the family's just hanging out.
Yeah, for days on end.
Yeah,
They'd
eating
eat around it.
and,
Yeah. And one of the points of that was to socialize children to death.
right. Public viewings.
Right. Yeah. And plus another aspect of it was usually it was in the home because most people died in the home
Right.
because modern medicine, just kind of went, good luck with that, pal.
Eh.
See you in hell, that
Right.
kind of thing. And nowadays, in 1900, the average life expectancy was it was like 49 years old.
Right.
In 2008, it's like 77, creeping up on 78 if it's not there already. So that extra, 20, almost 30 years has really kind of strung us out.
Right.
We are really interested in squeezing every last minute out of it, even sadly beyond the time when the quality of life has diminished.
So what are you saying?
Well, I'm saying we have all these machines to keep us alive, to breathe for us,
Right.
and we know that they're out there. So we have thrown ourselves even further into this denial of death,
Exactly.
as Becker called it.
Right. So the very things that keep us alive are distracting us from the obvious
Pretty much.
and the inevitable.
And there was another aspect when you brought up 19th century that I found really interesting. There was a trend. Have you heard of bereavement photography?
Yeah, that was have you seen the movie The Assassination of Jesse James?
I have not. No.
Yeah, he was famously photographed in his casket and the whole town came out. They had him on a block of ice,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole town came and viewed the body and had their picture made
Mm-hmm.
with picture made. We're from the South.
Picture made.
They had their picture made with the body of Jesse James. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, it's a photograph of a dead person. Usually though it was of a loved one, and oftentimes they'd be on a couch sitting up, looking like they were sleeping,
Right.
or in bed looking like they were sleeping. Sometimes their eyes were propped open to make it look like they were awake.
Yeah, that's really odd.
It was kind of odd, but it actually still continues today. There is bereavement photography. Usually, it's used by parents whose child was stillborn or died at a very very young age, and this will be the only photo that they ever have of them.
Right. Is this in the United States mainly? or-
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's you don't want to say it's odd because clearly they're getting something from it. Like
Right,
I'm sure it poses or it creates a sense of catharsis or finality to it.
Right.
And plus they can say, well, this is what my baby looked like as for as short a time as he or she was on Earth.
Right.
And it's very sad, but I imagine that you can get something out of it.
Yeah. Who am I to judge?
Exactly. And photography in general kind of has since it was created has always had kind of this fascination with death, like bereavement photography or outlaws.
Right.
Even Pablo Escobar. There's that famous photo of him all bloated and dead on that rooftop in Medellin.
Right. Or the
Right.
famous photo of Lizzie Borden's father, kind of sideways on the couch.
Yeah,
with
yeah.
his face mashed in.
And what is it about us humans that wish that photo wasn't so grainy?
Yeah.
That you could make it out a little more,
I know.
But at the same time, it kind of lets the imagination run wild. We are a sick, twisted species. We're afraid of our own death, and yet we love morbid photography
Right.
of dead people.
Or at least you and I. We don't want
Yeah.
to speak for
I
everyone.
guess we shouldn't speak for the rest of humanity, although, I'd say we're fairly typical. But back to the photography part, there's this really cool exhibit by a German photographer named Walter Schels, right?
Uh-huh.
And he did this series called Life Before Death. And what he did was he went and visited people who were terminally ill, spent the last, couple days of their lives with them,
Wow.
got, took a series of photographs of them, got like the one he was looking for, and then arranged to take another photo of them right after they died. And he juxtaposed them one right next to the other. And there's actually a really great spread on the Guardian's UK site.
Well, what did you find? Was it uplifting or was it depressing?
It's very subjective. It's death, There's
Right.
no objectivity with death. We have no idea what's coming after this. It's all subjective. You're scared of it. You're not scared of it. Whatever.
Right.
So it's definitely one of those things where you're going to take what you want out of it. And some are more startling than others, but it's odd and it's oddly comforting.
Yeah. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, well, you can see it on the Guardian site. But first, don't forget to go to howstuffworks.com and read Is There a Worst Way to Die? It's a pretty cool article, if I do say so myself. And stick around to find out which article makes me pretty excited, but scares the hell out of Chuck right after this.
Stuff You Should Know is brought to you by Visa. We all have things to think about, like, say, what's the best site to buy a new leather jacket? Or whether to buy the